Albert Anastasia was one of the founders of modern American Mafia with the help of Lucky Luciano. Anastasia later became the head of the organization Murder Inc. and eventually ascended to the position of boss in what became the modern Gambino crime family. He also controlled the waterfront of New York City for most of his criminal career, including the dockworkers' unions. However, on October 25, 1957, Anastasia entered the barbershop of the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan and was never seen alive again. This is the story of the Enforcer, the Grim Reaper, one of the most ruthless and feared figures in American organized crime history. Albert Anastasia was born as Umberto Anastasio on September 26, 1902, in the Calabria region of Italy, the son of Bartolomeo Anastasio and Mariana Polistena. Anastasia's father was a railroad worker who died after World War I, leaving behind 9 children. In 1919, Anastasia and his brothers illegally entered the United States. After deserting a freighter they worked on in New York, they soon began working as longshoremen on the Brooklyn waterfront. Anastasia quickly discovered that life on the Brooklyn docks was no fairy tale. The docks, when Anastasia first arrived, were a deadly and practically lawless place. In no time, the young and burly Anastasia established himself as a feared figure in this violent arena. He was a strong guy with enormous hands for his size. They were like steel. If he hit you, you felt it. It wasn't unusual for a single punch from him to break one of your bones. Being known as a tough guy led to opportunities to make money. At 18, Anastasia was ready to take the step from violence to crime. At that time, there was a lot of theft, with people stealing things from shipments that never reached their intended destinations. Anastasia soon commanded a successful gang of dock thieves. However, his success brought him into competition with a rival on the Brooklyn docks, a man named Joe Torino. Anastasia doesn't know it, but a brutal chain of events will catapult him into infamy. As far as Torino is concerned, if Anastasia wants to operate on his docks, he will have to pay for the privilege. Torino wants a cut of the action, but Anastasia has decided he will not let anyone extort money from him. As the dispute becomes physical, neither side backs down. Eventually, Anastasia erupts in uncontrollable rage. In front of witnesses, Anastasia beats Torino to death. Killing wasn't unusual on the violent Brooklyn waterfront in those days, but not this kind of murder. This act was etched in the minds of the witnesses, and each one reported it to the police. It was clear that Anastasia enjoyed it. Obviously, Anastasia would pay for taking this life. The docks might be a violent world, but when a man is beaten to death in front of dozens of people, the police will take action. Convicted for the murder of Torino, Anastasia was sentenced to death in the notorious Sing Sing prison in New York. Yet even there, not even the specter of execution can tame him. He continues beating people, including his fellow prisoners. Anastasia is as violent as ever, and even hardened convicts don't feel safe around him. Anastasia's violent and ruthless reputation works in his favor when one of his outbursts is noticed by a particular inmate, the prison barber. But this barber isn't just a barber. He's a scout for prolific criminal gangs operating outside the prison, and Anastasia intrigues him. He thinks this guy has potential. The barber believes Anastasia's skill set could be ideal for a particular client. That client is an up-and-coming lieutenant in one of New York's most powerful Italian gangs, Charles Lucky Luciano. Luciano was the quintessential mafia boss, ruthless, knowing what he wanted, and unafraid to go after it. In the New York of the 1920s, Luciano's gang was one of many involved in a violent war for control of the lucrative illegal alcohol trade. Coincidentally, alcohol is a commodity that Luciano can provide if he can secure a constant supply. Therefore, Luciano needs to control the Brooklyn docks, a key source of illegally imported alcohol flowing into the city. The barber believes that Anastasia's violent reputation and intimate knowledge of the docks could be invaluable to Luciano. But there is a problem. Anastasia is facing the electric chair. For a man like Luciano, however, this is just a small obstacle. First, Luciano uses top-tier lawyers to arrange a last-minute stay of execution for the young killer. The lawyers secure a new trial by getting Anastasia's original conviction overturned. Luciano's connections manage to have the conviction dismissed on technicalities. Anastasia entered prison as a violent young man, but in 1922, with Luciano pulling the strings, a transformed Anastasia walks out of death row and into a new life. The legend of Albert was born. Everyone talked about the guy who beat the chair. Owing his life to Luciano, it was time for Anastasia to return the favor. Fresh out of prison, he was sent to the front lines of the alcohol war between Italians and Irish on the Brooklyn docks. The fight between Italians and Irish for control of the waterfront was serious business. In no time, Anastasia proved his worth to the Italians. He was a very valuable soldier, and as everyone quickly discovered, a psychopath. If someone told him to kill a guy, he would say okay, and do it without remorse. By the late 1920s, Anastasia had become one of the key leaders of the International Longshoremen's Association, controlling 6 local chapters of the Union in Brooklyn. As part of the violent mafia disputes in New York, the Castellammarese War erupted in early 1931 between Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Lucky Luciano wanted to take control. He wanted to restructure all organized crime so that everyone would work together, regardless of their heritage. Luciano wanted the only interest at stake to be making money. To achieve this, he needed to eliminate the 2 bosses involved in the Castellammarese War, both traditionalist and dictatorial leaders who adhered to certain ethnic codes that seemingly limited Luciano's ambitious vision for the Mafia. The first target was Joe Masseria. However, Luciano needed a trustworthy killer and had to select 4 gunmen for the job. These had to be perfect, and one of those chosen was Albert Anastasia. Masseria was killed while dining at a restaurant in Coney Island. Reports indicate that while he was playing cards, the assassins, who were never officially identified or captured, entered the restaurant and shot him repeatedly. Carrying out this task established Anastasia in Luciano's eyes as someone who could be completely trusted. Several months later, the plan was completed when Luciano had the remaining boss, Salvatore Maranzano, brutally murdered. With Maranzano's death, Luciano put an end to the Castellammarese War and laid the groundwork for the creation of the Commission, a sort of centralized government for New York's 5 mafia families. This promoted an era of relative peace and organization among the various criminal factions. With his coup complete, Luciano could finally achieve his vision of a perfectly organized criminal enterprise and knew exactly where Anastasia would fit in. Luciano was not opposed to violence. If murders needed to be committed, they would be. What he needed was a force that would comply, a body that would kill on behalf of the Commission. This group of hitmen would later be dubbed by the press as Murder Inc. Luciano decided they needed a group of professional assassins to carry out necessary killings, and one of those chosen to lead this group of hitmen was his favorite killer, Albert Anastasia. Anastasia was the perfect model within the Mafia, recognized as a ruthless and unflappable killer. Thus, with orders from the Commission, all future assassinations would be carried out by these professional killers. Hits were no longer personal vendettas, they were business. Luciano imposed strict rules governing how Anastasia and the new crime syndicate should operate. One of the main rules was, "Thou shalt not kill a boss." That was an absolute no-go. They didn't kill politicians, judges, or prosecutors due to the intense backlash such murders would cause. With these rules in mind, Anastasia was now ready to kill whoever Luciano instructed him to. Luciano's vision of multinational cooperation was taking shape. While the Italian Anastasia worked with the Jewish Louis Lepke Buchalter to carry out sanctioned killings, Anastasia proved to be the perfect person for this job. Luciano, being Italian, instructed Anastasia, who then worked closely with Lepke. It's estimated that Murder Inc. committed thousands of murders during its 10 years of operation, many of which were never solved. With a new way of killing came a new way of speaking. An assassination order was called a contract. Sometimes the body was left on display as part of what they called the advertising budget. Someone who had stolen money might be found with their hands cut off, someone who talked too much with their tongue cut out. Seeing Anastasia at the helm of it all, but far from staying on the sidelines, Anastasia was an actively participating leader. He could have simply said, "You know what, kill this guy," but he didn't. He enjoyed killing and being part of it. It said he personally participated in 60 murders. He was a guy who could just go out and kill without remorse. But the Merchant of Death was a home-loving psychopath. They used to say he was a devil on the street and an angel at home, and that's basically what he was. He was married to Elsa, a Canadian immigrant 16 years younger than him, who loved him dearly. From 9 to 5, he was out there executing people, but back home in New Jersey, he led a fairly quiet life. The Mafia Commission was tested for the first time in 1935, when Dutch Schultz was told to abandon his plans to kill Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey. According to Luciano, Dewey's murder would lead to severe police crackdowns, and the syndicate's rules were already known. An enraged Schultz left the meeting after threatening to kill Dewey out of anger. Anastasia informed Luciano that Schultz had asked him to surveil Dewey's apartment complex on Fifth Avenue. Another version suggests that Anastasia also had a strong desire to eliminate the meddlesome Dewey. Ultimately, the commission called for a secret meeting to discuss the situation, and they decided to eliminate Schultz. After deliberating for nearly 6 hours on June 7, 1936, reasons seemed to be on Schultz's side, at least as far as Lucky Luciano was concerned. Luciano was convicted on 62 counts of forced prostitution as a result of an investigation conducted by Eunice Carter. Eunice Carter, who belonged to Thomas Dewey's investigative office, was sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison on July 18, 1936. After Luciano's imprisonment, the crime syndicate led by Anastasia suffered another heavy blow. Their nemesis, Thomas Dewey, decided that his friend Lepke Buchalter was the next target. Word spread that Lepke was next on Dewey's hit list. Then, in November 1936, with a murder charge against him, Lepke had to flee. For many years, Louis Lepke Buchalter had been known as the worst industrial racketeer in the United States. Fearing for his friend and crime partner, Anastasia used Maranzano's hitmen network to keep Lepke hidden for a long time. Some say he was abroad, perhaps in Jerusalem. A reward of $10,000 was offered to anyone providing information leading to his arrest, but it turned out he had been in Brooklyn all along. Now, fearing Lepke might face a fate similar to Luciano's, Anastasia took action and prepared to dismantle Dewey's case. This time, he didn't hold back. He was a guy who believed that witnesses had to disappear. If someone, God forbid, saw him kill someone, that person was as good as dead. Anastasia made sure there was no one who could testify against him in court. With a list of informants provided by Lepke, he put the crime syndicate to work eliminating key witnesses. 5 former associates of Lepke had been shot, and 2 had disappeared. One had to be found, dead or alive. But there was a problem. None other than FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover now insisted that Lepke must be caught. So Dewey's team increased the pressure. There was too much at stake. This had to end. The commission called Anastasia and presented him with a shocking solution. They would have to sacrifice Lepke to protect themselves, and Anastasia would play a vital role in this action. They told him, "This is what we're going to do. Because you're the only one Lepke really trusts, you'll deceitfully tell him that we've agreed to a deal with Dewey." Facing the ultimate predicament, Anastasia would have to betray his friend. Acting on these orders, Anastasia meets with Lepke and convinces him that there's an agreement that will save him from the death penalty. Lepke believes him. After all, they've worked closely together, and Anastasia has given him orders and seen him kill people. He has no reason to believe Anastasia would lie to him. On August 24, 1939, after an astonishing 3 years on the run, Anastasia leads the unsuspecting Lepke to a meeting with the FBI, where he believes he'll surrender in exchange for leniency. But Anastasia has betrayed his friend and crime partner. There is no deal. Lepke obediently surrenders and, of course, immediately faces serious charges. 5 years later, on March 4, 1944, Lepke becomes the only major Mafia member to be executed in the electric chair, a burden Anastasia would carry for the rest of his life. If he ever felt remorse about anything, this would likely be the only time he had to sacrifice a friend, but he knows there's little he can do about it. On the other hand, while Lepke's movie was running, Morris Diamond, who was known for resisting Mafia control attempts over unions, especially in the garment district in Manhattan, was allegedly murdered by Anastasia in May 1939, according to subsequent accusations. Anastasia was also accused of planning the murder of Peter Panto in the summer of 1939. Panto was an activist with the International Longshoremen's Association, leading a push for democratic reforms in the union's local chapters and refusing to be intimidated by association officials. Panto disappeared on July 14, 1939, and his body was not found until later on a farm in New Jersey. The effective end of Murder Inc. occurred when Abe Reles, a Brownsville gang leader who had been providing hitmen to Anastasia and the organization for 10 years, was captured by the police. Reles decided to cooperate with the government to avoid execution, which resulted in the conviction of 7 union members. Interestingly, Reles's statements also played a part in further implicating Lepke Buchalter. Reles had knowledge that could link Anastasia to the murders of Panto and Diamond, and some hallway rumors suggest that Anastasia offered a $1,000 reward for Reles's murder. Reles had to disappear for fear of legal action. The attention surrounding Anastasia posed a clear and present danger. It was something that needed to be addressed immediately. Ultimately, Reles was found dead after falling from his room onto the roof of a restaurant in a hotel in Coney Island on November 12, 1941. Surprisingly, he was under police custody, and it was never precisely determined who ordered his murder and how it was possible to carry it out. Reles was always remembered as the canary that could sing but couldn't fly. Perhaps the commission intervened to save Anastasia, or maybe it was Anastasia himself who saved his own skin. But no matter what, even though Reles never made it to testify, the crime syndicate suffered the aftermath of Thomas Dewey's relentless campaign. 3 more members of the syndicate were sent to the electric chair, with 2 of them becoming state witnesses. So, with Luciano behind bars and these hard hits, the commission dissolved the crime syndicate and relegated Anastasia to a new position within the Mangano criminal family. For Anastasia, this was a slap in the face. He felt he was ready to be the king. He didn't want to be second fiddle. He wasn't in the mood to follow the commission's rules, and it didn't take long before Anastasia showed how dangerous he could be. But before causing any trouble in his new family, he needed to gain more ground in his reputation within the surrounding circle. Reportedly, Anastasia was also the mastermind behind the idea of using the war effort to secure Luciano's release from prison during World War II. It's said that Anastasia orchestrated a deal to get a lighter sentence for Luciano, eventually securing parole in exchange for Mafia protection on the waterfront and Luciano's assistance with his associates in Sicily. As the United States needed allies in Sicily to advance the invasion of Italy in 1942, Anastasia joined the U.S. Army, seemingly motivated by a desire to escape the criminal investigation that dismantled the crime syndicate. He achieved the rank of technical sergeant, training soldiers to be stevedores in 1943. As a reward for his military service, he was granted U.S. citizenship the following year. Anastasia was honorably discharged and moved with his family to a farm somewhere in New Jersey. In 1948, he purchased a dress factory in Pennsylvania, relinquishing his port activities to his brother, Anthony. Despite only a few years passing, Anastasia had already become a powerful mafia figure in his own right. He currently served as the underboss of the Mangano criminal family, which was led by Vincent Mangano. Mangano had harbored resentment towards Anastasia's close ties with Luciano and his actions over their 20-year reign, especially hiring Anastasia's services without Mangano's consent. The 2 mobsters had numerous heated, almost physical arguments over business matters. Eventually, Vincent Mangano disappeared on April 19, 1951, and his body was never found. Philip, Vincent's brother, was found dead on the same day. Although no one was ever arrested in connection with the Mangano's murders, speculation widely circulated that Anastasia was behind their deaths. Anastasia, who had been acting as the head of the Mangano family at the time of their deaths, appeared before the commission, claiming that the brothers had wanted to kill him. However, he refused to confess to their murders. Despite some doubts, the Mafia Commission agreed to elevate Anastasia to the position of boss of the Mangano criminal family, which would now be known as the Anastasia faction. One of those who supported Anastasia's ascent was the well-known Mafia Prime Minister, Frank Costello, who saw Anastasia as an ally against the ambitious and resentful Vito Genovese. Joseph Bonanno, who simply wished to avoid a gang war, also backed Anastasia. If any commission members still had doubts about Anastasia's psychopathic profile, they would have fewer now. Arnold Schuster, a New Yorker who helped capture bank robber Willie Sutton, was allegedly murdered by Anastasia in March 1952. Schuster, who had no connections to the police or organized crime, simply recognized Sutton on the street from seeing his photo in the newspaper and decided to follow him and alert the authorities, leading to Sutton's capture. It is said that Anastasia saw Schuster being interviewed on television and allegedly said, "I can't stand informants, get rid of that guy." Schuster was shot dead on a Brooklyn street on March 8th in connection with his murder. No one was ever arrested. On the other hand, power-hungry Vito Genovese needed to get rid of Costello to take control of the family. Luciano Genovese sought allies because he couldn't achieve it without also eliminating Anastasia, a strong Costello ally. So he portrayed Anastasia as an unstable killer, threatening to disrupt La Cosa Nostra under legal pressure through his brutal actions. Vito Genovese began talking to other commission members saying, "Look, I told you this guy's a lunatic. He's a homicidal maniac. He's doing crazy things." Vito Genovese is an ascending boss, ambitious and calculating, eager to eliminate any competition. Genovese is everything Anastasia is not. If your ultimate goal is the top spot, Genovese has little trouble persuading a nervous commission that Anastasia is a major threat. In an effort to gain followers, Genovese also cited the selling of memberships in the Anastasia criminal family for $50,000 as another clear instance of commission rule infringement. Many high-ranking mafiosos were infuriated by this. Others claimed that Anastasia had been losing a lot of money in horse races, making him even more irritable and unpredictable in the following years. Genovese subtly gained the support of Carlo Gambino by promising him control over Anastasia's family in exchange for his cooperation. With Genovese's green light, the wheels of murder were set in motion. But first, Genovese decided to act against Costello. In early 1957, Costello was shot by Vincent Gigante outside his apartment complex on May 2, 1957. Though the injury was minor, Costello was persuaded to cede control to Genovese, and as a result, Frank Scalise, Anastasia's underboss and the man allegedly directly responsible for selling memberships, was also murdered on June 17th of that same year. Now, Anastasia's day had come. On the Friday morning of October 25, 1957, Anastasia entered the barbershop of the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. Anastasia's driver left him vulnerable. After leaving his vehicle in an underground garage and taking a stroll outside, two men with their faces covered by scarves burst into the barbershop while Anastasia was seated calmly in the chair. They shoved the barber aside and opened fire on him. After the initial burst of gunfire, Anastasia supposedly lunged at his attackers. In reality, Anastasia had been attacking the gunman's reflections in the barbershop mirror. The shooters continued firing until Anastasia finally collapsed and fell dead on the floor. Anastasia's murder generated significant public interest and sparked a high-profile police investigation. Ultimately, no one was charged in the case. Speculation about who killed Anastasia centered on the mafia members of the Profaci crime family, Joe Gallo, and some drug dealers from the Gambino family. Initially, it was concluded that Anastasia's murder was arranged by Genovese and Gambino and carried out by a group led by Gallo. At one point, Gallo was rumored to have bragged. In the end, Albert Anastasia was laid to rest, a testament to his brutal character. Only a handful of mourners attended his funeral, revealing where Anastasia stood among his colleagues. None of them showed up. Only his wife, some immediate family members, and perhaps a couple of associates were present. For a man who was the head of a criminal family, the absence of his peers spoke volumes. Anastasia's life in its entirety speaks to the evolution of the Mafia. If Albert Anastasia left any legacy, it was simply this: if you earned a reputation as a violent and ruthless leader, you were bound to meet a grim end. If you've enjoyed the story of the notorious Albert Anastasia, you won't want to miss the intriguing tale of the Prime Minister of the criminal underworld, Frank Costello. His story is right here on your screen. Subscribe now for more captivating stories from the world of crime and mystery. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.